The night air carried a strange mix of city smells as I stepped into the alley. The narrow passage between two old brick buildings was dimly lit by a single flickering street lamp at the far end, casting long shadows that danced with every flicker. I wasn't usually the type to venture into such places after dark, but tonight was different. Something about the text message I'd received earlier made this risk seem worth taking. Meet me in the alley behind Maxwell's at 11. Bring your curiosity, nothing else. The message came from a number I didn't recognize, but there was something intriguing about the mystery of it all. The sounds of the city seemed muffled here, as if the tall brick walls absorbed the usual cacophony of car horns and distant conversations. Instead, I could hear water dripping somewhere, probably from an air conditioning unit overhead, and the occasional rustle of paper blown by the gentle breeze. The alley smelled of rain-soaked concrete, traces of cigarette smoke, and something else I couldn't quite place, something like anticipation. I checked my watch, 10:58 p.m. My heart was racing, partly from nervousness, partly from excitement. What was I doing here? Meeting strangers in dark alleys wasn't exactly in my usual repertoire of weekend activities. Yet here I was, drawn by curiosity and perhaps a desire to break free from my predictable routine. The past few months had been nothing but work, sleep, repeat. Maybe this unexpected invitation was exactly what I needed. As I ventured deeper into the alley, my eyes adjusted to the dim light. That's when I noticed them. Two figures leaning against the wall about halfway down. They straightened up as they saw me approach. Two guys, both tall, both watching me with interest that made my skin tingle. I slowed my pace, suddenly questioning my decision to come here alone. But something in their posture wasn't threatening. It was almost welcoming, if such a thing was possible in a dark alley at night. "You actually came," the one on the left said, his voice carrying a hint of surprise and what sounded like approval. He was slightly taller than his companion, with broad shoulders and a face that caught what little light there was in interesting ways. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "I was betting you wouldn't show," the other one added. He was leaner, with a grace to his movements that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin. His voice was softer, but there was a playfulness to it that immediately put me more at ease. Most people don't follow through on mysterious invitations these days. I stopped a few feet away from them, maintaining what felt like a safe distance. "I'm still trying to decide if this was a good idea," I admitted, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the nervousness fluttering in my stomach. The taller one smiled, and even in the dim light, I could see it transformed his face completely. "The best decisions often start as questionable ones," he said. "I'm Alex, by the way, and this is Run." Rin gave a slight nod, his eyes never leaving mine. There was something in that gaze that made me feel like I was being seen, really seen, for the first time in a long while. It was both unnerving and exhilarating. "So," I said, trying to sound casual, "are you going to tell me why you wanted to meet here? Or is the mysterious alley rendezvous the entire point?" Alex laughed, a warm sound that echoed slightly against the brick walls. "The location is part of it," he admitted, "but not the whole story. We've been watching you." My body tensed immediately, alarm bells ringing in my head. But before I could turn and run, Rin spoke up quickly. "That came out wrong," he said, shooting Alex an exasperated look. "What he means is, we've seen you at Maxwell's a few times. You always sit in the corner booth, always order the same drink, always look like you're waiting for something to happen." I was surprised by how accurately he described my Friday night routine. I did frequent Maxwell's, the small bar around the corner. And I did always sit in the same spot, nursing the same drink, watching people come and go while wondering if anything interesting would ever happen in my carefully structured life. "And you thought what? That I needed rescuing from my boring existence?" I asked, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. Alex shook his head. "Not rescuing. Just an invitation to something different." He pushed himself off the wall and took a step toward me. I noticed he moved slowly, deliberately, as if giving me time to back away if I wanted to. Sometimes the most interesting experiences happen when we step out of our usual patterns. There was something in the way he said it, something in the way both of them were looking at me, that sent a shiver down my spine, not of fear, but of anticipation. The air between us seemed charged with possibility, with unspoken suggestions. Rin moved closer too, his movements fluid and graceful. "We thought you might be interested in a little adventure," he said, his voice lower now, more intimate. "Nothing dangerous or illegal. Just unexpected." I should have felt threatened, standing in a dark alley with two strangers who admitted to watching me. But strangely, I didn't. Instead, I felt a pull toward them, a curiosity that overrode my usual caution. There was something about their energy, Alex's confident directness and Rin's quiet intensity, that was magnetic. "What kind of adventure did you have in mind?" I heard myself asking, surprising myself with my willingness to continue this unusual encounter. They exchanged a look that seemed to contain an entire conversation. Then Alex smiled again, that transformative smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "First," he said, "we thought we'd see if you were the type of person who would meet strangers in an alley based on a mysterious text." "Clearly, I am," I replied, unable to hold back a small smile of my own. "Though I'm still not convinced that's a good thing." "It's neither good nor bad," Rin said thoughtfully. "It just means you're open to possibilities. That's rare, you know. Most people are too scared to follow their curiosity." As we stood there, the three of us forming an unusual triangle of tentative connection in the dimly lit alley, I became aware of a sound in the distance. Footsteps, growing louder, approaching the alley entrance. The rhythmic click of shoes on pavement echoed off the brick walls, creating an eerie soundtrack to our strange meeting. Alex's head turned sharply toward the sound, his body suddenly alert. Rin too seemed to tense, his relaxed posture giving way to something more vigilant. Before I could process what was happening, Alex moved toward me with surprising speed. In one fluid motion, he gently but firmly pressed me back against the brick wall, his body close to mine, shielding me from view of the alley entrance. The rough texture of the bricks pressed into my back, a stark contrast to the warmth of Alex's body nearly touching mine. His face was inches from mine, his eyes holding mine in a gaze that silently urged me to stay quiet. Rin had positioned himself beside us, his back to the wall as well, his attention focused on the approaching footsteps. My heart hammered in my chest, partly from alarm at the sudden movement, partly from the proximity of Alex's body to mine. I could smell his cologne, something subtle and woodsy, and feel the heat radiating from him. His breath was warm against my cheek as he leaned in closer, his lips nearly brushing my ear. "Sorry," he whispered, so quietly I barely heard him. "Just stay still for a moment." The footsteps grew louder, now clearly at the entrance to the alley. I held my breath, suddenly aware of how this might look to a passerby. Three people huddled suspiciously in a dark alley. Would they call the police? Confront us? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Alex's body was tense against mine, a solid presence that somehow managed to be both protective and thrilling. I could feel his heartbeat, quick but steady, unlike my own racing pulse. Rin had edged closer too, creating a human shield that concealed me almost completely from view. The footsteps paused at the alley entrance, and I felt Alex tense even more. Then, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, they continued past, growing fainter as whoever it was moved on down the street. Neither Alex nor Rin moved immediately. We stayed frozen in our positions, listening as the footsteps faded into the distance. Only when they were completely gone did Alex finally step back slightly, creating a small space between us. But he didn't move away completely, his hands still resting lightly on the brick wall on either side of me. "Why did we need to hide?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, still affected by the intensity of the moment. Ren's expression was unreadable in the shadows. "We didn't, necessarily," he said after a moment. "But this alley isn't exactly a public meeting space. And some of the beat cops in this area can be overzealous about loitering." It seemed like a reasonable explanation, but something in the way they had reacted, the immediate, almost practiced way they had moved to conceal our presence, made me wonder if there was more to it. But strangely, I wasn't scared. If anything, the mystery only deepened my fascination. Alex was still standing close, his eyes searching mine. "Are you okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "I didn't mean to startle you." I nodded, suddenly very aware of our proximity, of the way the dim light caught the angles of his face, of how Ruin was watching us both with those intense, observant eyes of his. "I'm fine," I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. Despite the strangeness of the situation, I felt more alive, more present than I had in months. You know, Rin said, his voice thoughtful. Most people would have run by now, or at least demanded more explanations. I considered this. He was right, of course. The rational response to being pressed against a wall in a dark alley by a stranger would be fear, outrage, a desperate attempt to escape. Instead, I felt intrigued, drawn in by the mystery of these two men and whatever game they were playing. Maybe I'm not most people, I replied, surprising myself with the confidence in my voice. Alex smiled at that, a slow, appreciative smile that made something warm unfurl in my chest. We noticed that, he said. That's why we reached out to you. The moment hung between us, charged with unspoken possibilities. I was acutely aware of the rough brick at my back, the cool night air, the way both men seemed to be waiting for something, a decision, perhaps, or a sign from me about what happened next. And then, in a move that surprised even me, I reached out and placed my hand on Alex's chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath my palm. His breath caught, a small sound in the quiet alley that seemed to echo my own surprise at my boldness. So what happens now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Is this the adventure you mentioned? Meeting in dark alleys and hiding from passers-by? Rin moved closer, his presence adding another layer to the already charged atmosphere. This is just the beginning, he said softly. If you want it to be. There was no mistaking the invitation in his words, in the way Alex's eyes had darkened as he looked at me, in the electric tension that seemed to connect the three of us in that moment. This wasn't just about an adventure in the conventional sense. This was about connection, about desire, about stepping out of the safe, predictable patterns of my life, and into something unknown and potentially transformative. I should have been scared. I should have been sensible. Instead, I found myself nodding, a small movement that somehow felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. Alex's response was immediate. His hand came up to cup my face, his touch gentle but confident. Time seemed to slow as he leaned in, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't want to. Instead, I met him halfway, closing the distance between us. The kiss was nothing like I had imagined, and I realized with a start that I had been imagining it, perhaps from the moment I saw him in the alley. It was both soft and insistent, a perfect balance of giving and taking. His lips were warm against mine, and I could taste a hint of mint on his breath. My hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath his jacket. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, my heart pounding in a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. Alex's eyes were dark, his breathing as uneven as mine. And then I felt another presence, closer now, and turned to find Rin watching us, his expression a complex mix of desire and something else, approval, perhaps, or appreciation. Without words, an understanding passed between the three of us. This night was taking a turn I hadn't anticipated when I received that mysterious text, but one that felt right, exciting, necessary even. As if I had been sleepwalking through my life and was finally, fully awake. Ren's kiss was different from Alex's, more measured, more deliberate, but no less affecting. Where Alex had been passionate, Ren was methodical, as if he was learning me through the kiss, memorizing my responses. My back was still pressed against the brick wall, but now it felt less like hiding and more like an anchor, keeping me grounded as sensations threatened to overwhelm me. The sound of distant footsteps barely registered this time, a background noise that held no threat, no reason to stop the connection that was building between us. The night air had grown cooler, but I felt only warmth, a heat that started where our bodies touched and spread outward, making me forget we were in an alley, exposed to the elements and potentially to view. When we finally separated, all three of us breathing heavily, I felt changed somehow, as if something had shifted within me, aligning pieces I hadn't known were out of place. The alley looked different too, no longer mysterious and potentially threatening, but intimate, a space transformed by what had happened within it. Now what? I asked, my voice husky with emotion and desire. Alex and Rin exchanged another of those looks that seemed to contain entire conversations. Then Alex turned back to me, his expression serious despite the desire still evident in his eyes. Now, he said, we invite you to continue this somewhere more comfortable, if that's what you want. The choice was clear, laid out before me without pressure or expectation. I could walk away now, return to my orderly life with nothing but the memory of an unusual encounter in an alley. Or I could take a step further into the unknown, following this unexpected connection to wherever it might lead. In that moment, standing between two strangers who somehow didn't feel like strangers anymore, the decision seemed both monumental and incredibly simple. The person I had been before stepping into the alley might have hesitated, might have chosen the safe path back to familiar routines. But that person had been changed by brick walls and hidden kisses, by the thrill of being seen and desired. "Yes," I said, the word feeling like a key turning in a lock. "I want to continue." The smiles that spread across both their faces were worth any risk, any step into the unknown. As we left the alley together, walking close enough that our shoulders brushed, I couldn't help but think about how differently this night had turned out from what I had expected. How one impulsive decision to follow a mysterious invitation had led to this moment of connection, of possibility. The city streets looked different somehow as we walked, more vibrant, more alive with potential. Or perhaps it was me who was different, awakened to possibilities I had been blind to before. Either way, as I walked between Alex and Ruan, their presence solid and reassuring beside me, I felt a sense of rightness, of stepping into a story that had been waiting for me all along. Whatever happened next, whether this was the beginning of something lasting or simply one extraordinary night, I knew I would never regret saying yes to the adventure that began with two guys waiting in an alley and the press of brick against my back as footsteps passed by. Some risks, it turned out, were absolutely worth taking. Total _char_count, 17,546.